What up, Hoof listeners? Welcome into the Hoof Podcast on Thursday night. Appreciate you having you with us. We had a whole show planned, right? But then breaking news happens, and you got to pivot, right? So we're going through making new graphics, going through everything. I mean, I feel like Brandon Bean with the timing could have been a little better for us.
Well, we knew moves were coming, and Bills Mafia has to learn to be patient, right? We're shopping on a budget this year still, so everybody was like going nuts that we didn't make a big signing or something right away in the whatever you want to call it, the pre-negotiating period. I know people don't like that legal tampering term, but from Monday right to Wednesday when the league year started, and then the league year started and the Bills still didn't sign a big name, but we knew it was coming. We needed this move. This is veteran free agent wide receiver that it was definitely one of the things on the checklist, and certainly a guy that's going to add a lot. But yeah, Bills Mafia had to be patient, and sure enough, Brandon Bean brought it right before the show just for us to have to redo things a little bit. But hey, it's an exciting thing to talk about, so bring it on, right? And this is the news we like.
Yeah, and you don't seem like a blunt guy to me, so I'm going to go with the cigar, right? You're smoking a good Winston Churchill, and let's say the sun's setting, smoking it down, right? You get to the last little bit and it starts to taste a little funny, right? Because you're getting towards the end. But you'll take one more puff, right? And that last puff's usually pretty good, and then you toss it, right? I feel like that's exactly what these receivers are, right? One more puff, the last puff for these guys, right? I mean, Samuel's had pretty productive years. 2 years ago was better than last year, but still productive last year. Mac Hollins, I think, had a productive year 2 years ago, but last year had a down year. So, I mean, it's exactly what you're looking for if you're Brandon Bean, right? Come to Buffalo, play with a good quarterback, have an opportunity to rejuvenate your career and have more productive years. I mean, because you look at the Commanders, I mean, they're tanking last year. They lost 9 games in a row. The Falcons, they had quarterback issues with Mac Hollins. So it's a down year for them, right? Didn't know who the quarterback was, went back and forth. So it's a good opportunity. But if you look at Mac Hollins 2 years ago with the Raiders, pretty productive year. I think close to 700 yards receiving. So it's exactly what you're looking for if you are shopping in the bargain bin.
Right. And you I don't like the cigar analogy so much because you make it sound like they're at the end of their career. You know, they're not at the end of their career. These are guys with they're younger, right, than the guys we had previously. They have more experience in terms of, Samuel at wide receiver, which is what we needed. Upside is the word that I would use, right? There's upside here where you're catching them at a low point. Yes, maybe, right? Because of the situations they were in, but you know that they're capable of even more than what they've already produced, right? Curtis Samuel has never played with a quarterback the caliber of Josh Allen, not even close, right? And same with Mac Hollins, although I feel like his role is going to be more special teams and kind of reserve wide receiver, although we've seen the Bills use those wide receivers, and it's good to have depth there when there's injuries inevitably. So both signings I think are important for this team, but to me it's about that upside, right? That upswing. Yes, come to Buffalo, get yourself in that upswing, play with Josh Allen, get yourself to the peak of your career, and that's where you want to be with this, right? Yeah, I'm happy with both of these signings. I think they were both moves needed. And it doesn't mean we're done yet. That's for sure. So it's moving in the right direction, though.
Yeah, and 3-year deal, $24 million with an upside to $30 million for Curtis Samuel, $15 million guaranteed. This is a cheap receiver in today's market, right?
Oh yeah.
Productive number 2. I mean, they're not going to go, $5 million a year anymore. It's just the receiver market is just rising and rising. It's getting to the level where it's like almost with quarterback salaries, right? So if you're looking for a productive guy who's proven, who does have some years left, right, who's still productive, you have to pay, right? And I think that's kind of what we're looking at here, especially at this phase in free agency. I mean, there's still options out there. It seems a little early, honestly. So I think the Bills were just willing to pay on this one.
Yeah, and this is, a situation. The contract details are not released yet. We know this much about the contract, but in terms of what is the cap hit for 24, my guess is it'll be around 4 or 5 million with the, signing bonus spread out, and then probably like 8 million and then 12 million to make it where it's cuttable in the third year, and there's going to be some spread out, some dead cap involved there. But Bean is working the magic to make it work within the budget and still give this guy what he's worth. And the whole 24 worth up to 30 million, we know that's a PR for the agents and all that to say, oh, it's a 3-year, $30 million contract. Yes, but in reality, it's a $24 million contract. And in reality, when we see the details, it's likely a 2-year contract where he's going to be with the team for 2 years. And the third year is an optional, team has some leverage to cut him. We know that's how Bean works. So even without seeing it, that's my interpretation of what it's going to be. But the numbers will be important too in terms of the cap hit for this year, but it'll be digestible. And we know that. And this is without Brandon Bean pulling any other levers yet, right? He still has, extensions that he could do, the Taron Johnson, will it be some other guys in there who could get extended? And of course, any other reworks that are done, plus the $10 million that they're getting June 1st for the Trey White release, which I think could be used in other ways as well. I mean, if you're missing a piece or God forbid there's an injury at that time, there's trade value that can happen. So you got to have a little money to play with still. And Bean has been working magic when it comes to the numbers here. I think this contract will fit right in with that.
Yeah. So what do we know about Curtis Samuel, right? He's 27, right? Drafted in 2017 by the Carolina Panthers. Kind of had some injury issues, right? Only played 9 games his rookie season, 13 games in 2018. Really, in those 13 games, only 500 yards receiving. Got better, right? That kind of had some injury issues, but got over it in 2019. Appeared in 16 games, 627 yards receiving that year, 6 touchdowns. And then COVID year, right? 15 games, 851 receiving yards with Carolina. Goes over to Washington, another injury, right? Only appears in 5 games. And then the last 2 seasons, he's only missed 1 game in those 2 seasons. Both years had around 600 yards receiving. So, I mean, it seems like kind of a rocky start for him, but the last 2 seasons, I think there's a lot to like here. But again, you watch his highlights, you watch his film, you can put him anywhere on the field, right? And just going back and watching last year, still has the burst, right? Still out running corners. And one thing you really like about him is you can line him up at running back, you can line him up on the outside, put him in the slot. I mean, this guy can go anywhere. And one thing that pops off for me is just still has the explosiveness, right? When you watch it, and also contested catches, right? You just see a ton of contested catches from him, and they love running the trap handoffs or the end arounds with him, and he's been pretty productive at that, right?
Yeah. So I watched. The first thing I did was I know Curtis Samuel, the receiver. We have impressions of him. We know he's been in the league, right? The speed. He was on our free agent radar already. So I looked into him there a little bit. But once we signed him, the first thing I did was look up some highlights, right? And I agree with you with what you mentioned. Some of the things that stood out, contested catches, which, for a guy like him, we knew he has the speed, which is something the Bills needed to add. He has the versatility to play everywhere, which is an important thing in this offense, especially. I mean, we see tight ends lining up in the backfield. We see all sorts of formations. Samuel's going to be adaptable for that. And I think that'll help with the offense that Brady wants to run there. And his contested catch ability to me stood out more than anything. The speed down the field, which we said the Bills need, and just his energy on the field, the tenacity. He reminded me in that aspect of a Stephon Diggs, where he's going to fight, he's going to have attitude on the field, but he's going to be smart about it, right? He's a small guy relatively. He's 5'11". He's not like this 6'4" bulky huge guy or something, right? So he plays smart when he gets the ball, and he can get the yards after catch and use his speed to make guys miss. And I think that's going to be what I'm excited to see, how far he can go with that with Josh Allen at quarterback, right? He's never played with somebody like that, as we've mentioned. So I think finding it's going to take a while to build some chemistry. Hopefully they're able to do that through, camp and the preseason and all that. But once they build that chemistry, that can be an electric move for them. Think Cole Beasley and, reliability. I know we have Shakir in the slot now, but in terms of a guy who, you can release it to and he's going to catch, or, we know Josh Allen likes to roll out and the play is broken. A guy like Samuel can get open and you can throw it to him. I saw that a lot in the highlights as well, where it's a broken play, contested situation, and he just zigs and zags around until the quarterback heaves it up to him and he ends up making a play, right? So those are all good aspects that Samuel is going to add to the Bills. And I think this signing is pretty much, worth every penny that they gave him.
Yeah, and I think you look around the Bills receiver room, and this includes Dalton Kincaid as well, right? And I think you have, you talked about Cole Beasley a little bit. There's really 4 guys that can do those sort of things, right? Just to find the hole in the zone, get some yards after catch, right? Really, that's Kincaid's specialty too, is the F tight end out in the slot, right? So I mean, now you're looking at like, who do you guard here? Because like, there's so much so all these receivers are interchangeable, right? I don't know if you'd put Kincaid on the outside. I mean, we've seen it at times, but I would not recommend it. But there just seems like those easy throws, that can get yards after catch. Now you have a bunch of guys that can do that, and I think that makes it challenging for the defense because somebody's going to be lined up against a linebacker, right? And I think with the athleticism now, bringing in a guy like Samuel, all of them can beat a linebacker in coverage.
Right. And with Samuel specifically, it's the downfield aspect of that, right? We've seen it in the short and intermediate. Now it's the deep ball. You can do that with a guy like Samuel who can get open and use his speed to his advantage there and beat guys athletically, like you said. And one of my favorite stats that I saw retweeted, I can't remember which of the stats people retweeted it, but it was that I saw anyway. Samuel had the 3rd fastest burst off the line of scrimmage in the NFL last year, which is something obviously that helps any receiver. And on a team with Josh Allen, when you have that burst, you can beat the guy in front of you no matter how good that cornerback or defender is. You're going to get past them and they're going to have issues with it, right? If it's not getting the ball to him, if the safety goes to that guy, then like you said, under the middle, there's going to be a guy missing somewhere. So just even if it isn't production rate away from Samuel, that attention alone is going to open things up for Diggs and Kincaid and the whole rest of the bunch there. So again, it makes a lot of sense to add a guy like this. And he was on the radar. We talked about him every show, I think, that I listened to mentioned him as a possible target. And I'm glad that the salary came within a range where, it was targetable and hittable. This is what we needed. Veteran wide receiver who can get the job done. And he adds the speed element, different, but similar to, at the same time, what this offense likes to do and fits in really well. That said, I think it takes off the board a couple of guys that we were most interested in and talked about. DJ Chark for me, LaVisca for you, I know. That's okay with me. I'm perfectly fine having Samuel, who is, I thought he was above the price range. He was the next tier up in my mind from the guys we were talking about that were more in budget, I think. So I think that does eliminate any other veteran wide receiver signing unless a guy comes in for minimum just to compete. But I would expect this is the guy they go with, and those guys are going to end up somewhere else.
Yeah, we were shopping at the Dollar General, right?
Exactly.
I mean, before all these moves happened, like all this cap room appeared all of a sudden. Now we're going to Target and getting receivers. So, good things to like, lots of like there. Let's see. Samuel and Hollins, how does that impact the draft for you?
It doesn't. It does not move the needle whatsoever on the draft for me. And I'll tell you why, right? Most people are like, oh, well, now we have a receiver, so we don't need it. No. We signed AJ Epenesa. Do we still need defensive tackle? Yes, right? Like there's 5 guys there that we only had 1, right? So we signed a couple more, but it doesn't eliminate the need at the position. I think for 2 reasons. One is that although Samuel can play all over the field, he's the veteran wide receiver we needed. That box was already on my list, right? So we needed a veteran wide receiver, number 1 in free agency, and we need to draft a guy early who can impact and be the true X receiver I want. I want a true X who can, play that position well, and the veteran behind him who would be Samuel in this case. Hollins, I think, is truly more of a depth and special teams ad. A lot of people have said he's the Trent Sherfield replacement, basically, which is, I like that move, right?
Yeah, he seems like a straight line runner,
right?
Catches deep passes, right? Pretty limited.
Have you seen? But he's jacked, right? This guy is, I think he's 6'4", and and he's. So we've always talked about, I think on our show for years, how Josh Allen has never really had a super tall receiver to throw the ball to. this guy
Kelvin
gets that
Benjamin.
done. You could see that happen in the red zone, right? He could maybe be a factor there, but you're talking about depth, right? He's not going to get a lot of snaps on the field, and he's going to be on special teams, right? He's played special teams throughout his career. He's a big, strong guy on special teams, so you need that too, right? So that's good to have on your team, but it doesn't move the needle for me. It replaces the special team players we're losing. We'll talk more about that later, but it's also a depth wide receiver signing that I really like in place of Hardy and Sherfield, who left. But Samuel is going to have more of an impact on this team than Hollins. However, still does not move the needle for me in terms of draft at all, not even a little bit. Wide receiver is top of the list, is the biggest need. We absolutely need to do that. I absolutely think it's going to be round one, whether it's trading up for one of those guys and landing, the receiver of the Bills' choice, whoever it is that Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott agree is their guy, if there's a run on wide receiver, or taking one at 28 if one falls to us that they like, they're going to take them. I know everything at this point from, trading up. I've seen everything at this point from trading up to make sure they get a guy to taking Ladd McConkey at 28 to, picking guys that I think shouldn't go until the second round. But if there's a guy there at 28 that Beane and McDermott are like, they're going to take him regardless. I don't care what edge or defensive tackle. We can talk about needs there as well, but it does not move the needle for me. Wide receiver is still top of the list, is still the biggest need. Get that true X guy. And there's a lot of them in this draft, and there's a lot of them at the top. And I trust that they're doing that evaluation to get that job done.
Yeah. And I think before the signing, everyone's in on receiver, right? That's the biggest need. Defense, Daquan Jones getting re-signed, kind of fills defensive tackle a little bit. Safety, low value position, other ways to fill that. But now I think with Samuel coming in, I think it does take the pressure off a little bit. You can start to look at best available, right?
No.
It's not so much that you have to reach. And what I'm talking about is if Troy Franklin's gone, if A.D. Mitchell's gone, right? Brian Thomas would be gone in that scenario. And you basically have to choose between, Ladd McConkey or Keon Coleman based on where you're looking, where you have them on your draft, on your board. So to me, it's like you have more options with this signing in the draft, right? I think you're less inclined to trade back, right? You could trade back now and it wouldn't be the end of the world. Whereas before it's like, well,
true.
You have to reach a little bit to fill that position. So I think puts them in a better position for the draft, right?
Right. Because
I think, honestly, like Ladd McConkey is probably not a target anymore, if you're asking me.
Because Samuel kind of replaces that.
Well, I think he'd play primarily in the slot, kind of that Cole Beasley type thing, right? Just finding the hole in the zone, catching the ball. But I think now you need an outside receiver. Samuel can do that role. Shakir can do that role. Kincaid can do that role. You kind of need somebody on the X,
the true
X, Troy Franklin types, right?
Yeah.
Straight line runner, right? So I think it does impact the draft in that way, right? You're not just looking for any receiver anymore. You're looking for a particular type, as you mentioned, right? The X receiver.
Yeah, and that's exactly. And I still, you said Samuel plays some of that role or whatever, but you agree wide receiver is still a need in the draft, like a top need. Like this is what they're going to go after. Because there's also the talk of long term. You got to have somebody there long term, even though Samuel just signed this contract and Diggs is going to be getting older. You have to draft young guys to come in and be ready. And the sooner they start building that chemistry with Josh Allen, the sooner they get on the field, the better it's going to be long term for that preparation. And again, I think Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane are on that page right now. They know the first priority here is Josh Allen, and we've got to do what it takes to make sure he still has everything going, and we'll figure the rest out as we go. So, I don't think any of my top priorities have changed with any of the signings really so far.
Yeah, and I think you should get younger, right? And Samuel's still a young player, but like 2 years down the road after this contract, he'll be pushing 30, 31, right? We know Diggs' age. So I do think you have to get younger too. But you got to get the right guy as well. And that's interesting. I mean, I think everyone likes Brian Thomas. A.D. Mitchell's been rising up boards for good reason, running the 4-3. Kind of seems like he can do it all, right? He might be the steal of the draft if you can get him late. And Troy Franklin seems to be falling a little bit because there's just questions around can
he
he
didn't have a
run?
good camp.
What's his
Yeah,
route
or a
tree,
good, yeah.
right? Like he seems more like a straight line runner, just going to beat you with speed, which he can do. But can he run a full route tree? There's questions there. So like a Jalen Hyatt type, right, for the Giants.
Oh,
Just straight
that's
line
not a good
speed, and
comparison right now.
well, he
But
just hasn't
yeah,
been really productive in the NFL. So I think
I
that's what's
mean,
pushing Troy Franklin back a little bit.
right.
And I just wanted to mention Keon Coleman.
Mm.
He's very intriguing to me, right?
Polarizing guy, the most
Yes.
polarizing guy in this draft so far, I think,
But I
for
think
me anyway, that I've seen.
really his disadvantage is he's in a draft that's extremely competitive at his position, right?
Mm-hmm,
I
mm-hmm.
think when you get into the details, there's a lot to like about Keon Coleman, right? If you look at a guy like Drake London, I think is a good comp,
That's
and
a
he's
good comp. Yeah.
very productive for the Falcons, right?
Sure,
And he was
that's
a
a
top 10
positive.
guy,
Yeah.
right? He was a top 15 guy. He can do those same type of thing, using body as leverage, right? Contested catches seems to be his
Mm-hmm.
strength, but he's not the top end fastest guy. And I think Drake London ran like a 4.58 in the 40, right? So to me, I think Keon Coleman is something to look at 28. I know you hate that.
I know. I'm not on the Keon Coleman train. I do think he's going to be successful in the NFL, whichever team he goes to, but I just can't get on board with a guy who's so polarizing, right? There's enough experts saying this guy's going to be a bust that I just don't want anything to do with it. Although when I watch him, I say the same things you do. Oh, contested catches. The argument from more of the experts is, well, he can't get open. That's his problem with contested catches. And, he's slower. He's not a speed guy. And, he's strong. Sure, he can battle, but is that going to translate well to the NFL? There's too many questions there for me. And any guy you draft is going to have questions. I get
Right.
that, but you have to somewhat lean on the experts, the
Right.
scouts.
There's plenty of speed guys who don't make it, right?
Yes. Yeah, the same thing. You
The
can't have
fastest 40
one
doesn't always
factor.
translate.
Exactly. You can't
Yeah.
have one factor and then that's immediately going to make you the guy either. But again, I think he's the one guy that I'm like not on board with is Keon Coleman. If they draft him, great. They see something in him and I trust that, but not the one that I'm going to have mocked to the Bills for sure. I think the added pressure too, and the reason that I truly believe the Bills will either trade up or draft wide receiver at 28, either way, is that whoever you don't take, you can be damn sure that Kansas City is. So there is added pressure in that sense, right? You better have your evaluations done to a T where you're like, you know what? Even if these 4 are gone, we are taking this 5th guy who we have a second round grade on because we can't let Kansas City take him, right? In the sense of we know they're going to likely be on board for a wide receiver and that this player is good enough that if he ends up on our competitor, that's going to be really bad, right? So it's a double-edged sword there. And I feel like when they're evaluating, McDermott and Bean know what's going on, and they are evaluating in that sense too. Like, okay, if these 2 guys are still on the board and we take one, that means Kansas City's likely getting the other. And what does that mean, long term for who we're going to end up facing down the line? Now, you don't make your own decision just based on who else is going to pick somebody, but it does play a factor in this case because you can't pass on wide receiver and know that they're going to take the guy that you should have taken who turns into a star or whatever, right? So that is, again, another reason why I just absolutely am on board with the Bills are taking wide receiver in the first round. And
Right.
I hope it is, the guy that they truly want and they don't leave somebody on the board. There's been a lot of push for Ladd McConkey lately. I really hope Brian Thomas ends up being the guy. Adunze is actually one of my favorite receivers in this draft, but I think he's going to be long gone.
Well,
early.
he's everybody's favorite, right?
Yeah.
Those
Is he?
top 3
Yeah, I don't
guys,
know.
every
Yeah.
team would love to have them.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. But they're going to be long gone. And if Thomas falls that far, it'll be a miracle, I think. But you never know. Maybe A.D. Mitchell's rise is going to be there. But that's another guy where you hear positive and negative about him. If the Bills end up taking whoever, Troy Franklin, Ladd McConkey, that means A.D. Mitchell's still on the board and he's going to go to Kansas City. I mean, that
they
would
need a
be
tackle
tough.
as well, too.
Sure.
But you can't,
I mean,
it's
it's not given that they're going to take him, but the
Mhm.
fact that if you leave him on the board and they can take him, you need to keep that in mind.
Right. But you can't just let the mere presence of Kansas
No.
City force you into reaching for a receiver. You
But
know
it's
what I mean?
what you need.
Yeah.
You're
So if you
taking
like
him
a
because-
guy,
Yeah.
if you are set on Brian Thomas and he falls, you got to trade up
Sure.
and get him. You know,
At this point, though,
there is a weird gap at 28, I think, where most rankings I've seen from various sources, there seems to be a weird gap where AD Mitchell rising, Troy Franklin, fall into his early second round. I mean, it almost seems like you're in a position where if these Brian Thomas, AD Mitchell go early, you're going to end up reaching for a guy who should be in the second round, right? And that's kind of what you want to avoid. So I think just having the ammo, like, Brandon Bean knows, having the late round picks, using them to trade up a few spots just to get the value right. We know they're huge on just make sure you draft them at the right position if you value them at that position, right? So I think that's kind of what they're planning on, if you ask me, right? Outside looking in. You're loaded up on the back end with draft picks. We've seen that work for them. They just trade up, 2 or 3 spots and get the guy they want. Saw it with Kincaid last year. We've seen it in the past with Kyrie Elam, right? Which doesn't always work either.
Exactly. I mean, that's why I think I was going to ask you next, where do you draw the line at round 1 wide receiver? I mean, I've seen everybody from Ladd McConkey, AD Mitchell, Worthy, Keon Coleman, who we've already talked about, all in the first round. And then you have some guys like a Troy Franklin, what's another name that's come up in the first round?
Roman Wilson. Oh, first round?
First round. I'm talking like where, I think that's about where the line is. But if the Bills took Troy Franklin, we've already talked about that as, I'm happy with that in the first round. And now he's projected to go second. I don't care. The Bills should take him if he's there. And that's the guy that they've evaluated and said, we like him, right? They deserve to take the guy that they think is, going to fill that need for them, especially again at the X receiver position, which I think Troy Franklin would be a good match for.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. He's an X receiver. And I think he does have a little more route capability than Jalen Hyatt, but he's in that category, right? If you ask the scouts to read up on it, straight line, he's going to beat you with speed, right? And that's getting off the line, stuff like that, question marks, right? Contested catches, question marks. But definitely speed, and obviously he's a tall guy too, which helps in the red zone.
Yeah, McConkey also just had his pro day, right? That was a popular. I think that's another reason why he was on the rise. A lot of guys didn't work out. He did there. He was kind of the star of the show there, and he did really well by evaluations that I've heard.
He's a smart player. He's super quick, right?
And you know what? One of the things that we talked about on the show, like it or not, Brandon Bean and Sean McDermott use character as a judgment. It doesn't matter how talented you are. You need to be a character guy, a leader, not necessarily somebody who's always out in front, but you have to be that guy on the field and off, basically. And they use those interviews as a big part. And I heard an interview with Ladd McConkey at his pro day.
I'm sure it went well, really good.
It was phenomenal. And this was just on NFL Network or whatever. But, I was like, okay, now I've got this guy circled because I've seen the interview with him, and he is that guy. Like, he's a stand-up guy, and he's, he says all the right things, and he talked about competing, and every word he said, I'm like, oh, Sean McDermott is like highlighting these words in his notebook right now, because this was, that to me could mean that, he could be that guy going to the Bills. But I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that kind of stuff from a few other guys yet.
I don't see it, and here's
there'll
why.
There'll be more on the list like that, but because he had his pro day and he's been in the news lately, a lot of guys have him running up the board right now, and that is, one of them. So we'll see where he ends up.
He's a smart player, and I think he's gonna go late first round, right? Because there's a lot to like there. It's hard to see him not being productive in the NFL, right? The problem is finding holes in the zone, taking those short underneath passes. I think that he would excel at that on the NFL level. The problem is you have Kincaid, you have Knox, right? Those guys already do that type of stuff. Now you bring in Curtis Samuel. He can do some of those roles as well. Khalil Shakir does some of that, right? So there's just, it seems like there's just too much of that type of receiver in the Bills receiver room. And you need to diversify and find another strength, right? Whether that's you want a big physical receiver in Keon Coleman, or you want a straight line guy who can, keep the 2 deep safeties deep, right? And Troy Franklin,
keep them deep,
right? Keep them deep, right? Or AD Mitchell, right? Who's a 4-3 guy. So if it's me, I'm looking at those type of receivers. But who knows? Joe Brady's going to have his own, fingerprint on this decision. It seems like the Bills are kind of changing the guard at coordinators, right? Defensive and offensive. So, who knows what they have in mind, right? But I think they're off to a good start here with the Samuel signing. Are they already better than last year in the receiver room?
I mean, it's hard to say right away. I still think you draft, as long as you draft that wide receiver in round one of these guys that we've talked about, any of them, yes, I would say we're better at wide receiver in the long run. I mean, we saw the 2 signings that we made last year go bust, right? And that really sucked. So I think any move is an upgrade. And certainly those were budget moves as well. Those weren't big elaborate signings. The Curtis Samuel signing alone is much bigger than either of those were, right? So I think in that sense, absolutely, they said, you know what, being just budget at wide receiver wasn't good enough. We've upgraded now, and we lost Gabe Davis, so now we need to remove that as well. And we all know how I feel about Gabe Davis. Glad he was on the team, contributed what he could, but it was time to move on. And I think we can upgrade there. So I actually think Samuel is an upgrade there in terms of his receiving ability and his dynamic ability down the field. So yes, we are on the move to upgrade. You still need to add more just in terms of having the physical bodies, the capability. But yes.
Yeah. And you mentioned special teams too. Mac Hollins, I think there is a special teams restructure going on, right?
Big time.
Sarah Neal signs with Miami. He's been a long time special teams player, right? And I think
guys like Tyler Matakevich is a free agent.
I was going to say Matakevich. Yep, that's another one. He's still a free agent, right? They haven't re-signed him yet.
Nobody's. I don't. Still not that I've heard, but you never know. There could be breaking news on that sometime. But yeah, no word on Matakevich. But it appears, at least through the signings that we had, right? When you're talking about a depth linebacker who can play special teams, who does that sound like, right? So I mean, that's exactly where it seems to be going. Is they're moving on from these guys. It's time to get younger. It's time to get better in terms of depth, right? Although Matakevich was a great special teams player, he wasn't a linebacker, right? I mean, he was an LB in label, but not on the field really. And I think when you upgrade at that position, you're bringing him in, Morrow, and saying, here's a guy who not only is dynamic as a linebacker, can play both positions, has had the green dot on his helmet, which is another thing, but he's a special teams guy as well. So I think bringing in guys who can play multiple aspects and still paying them minimum salaries, right? He's not getting some huge number to be the 3rd or 4th linebacker and a special teams guy. That's important, right? You took Matakevich, his number off the book, but also still upgraded in my mind at that kind of spot. And it seems like all the way around now, special teams has gotten younger. Our special teams took a step back last year, and now they're like, okay, this is what we have to do moving forward. It's part of the business, right? We weren't good enough. Make those cuts, move on. Thank you for your service. We love all those guys. There's no bad blood there, but it was time to find better pieces. And I do think that adding a guy like Morrow and Hollins, those are going to be good special teams players that are the new staples on that side of the ball for us.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of some of those deep receivers, if any of them contribute to special teams. Isabella, Justin Shorter, KJ Hamler. I'm not sure if he makes a team, but he's just, if you go back and look at KJ Hamler's track record, it's just injury after injury. Something always pops up with him.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out with a lot of teams. It doesn't seem like it's going to work out here if you look at the history. But you got to think like that's what they're looking for out of those players, right? Especially bringing in Curtis Samuel. We've already talked about the draft, probably going to add 1 or 2 receivers in the draft. So really the competition at that lower level is special teams, right? So I think that's why you bring those type of guys in, right?
Yeah.
We did see Isabella contribute to special teams and, kick return in some situations, right? It'll be interesting to see if that's the plan moving forward with him, or is it somebody else?
Right.
Is it Samuel? Maybe
we really don't know what they're thinking in terms of punt and kick return specialists right now. So you're right. That is a role that one of these guys could take, or maybe somebody who's already on the roster in like Isabella, or signed like Isabella. Yeah. So who knows? That's still a question mark when it comes to special teams. But those other roles, gunner and guys who can hit on defense, certainly we are replacing, right? The Metakeviches and the Saran Neals and all that of the world. So, yeah.
Michael helping us out with the news while we're recording here.
Yeah.
Terrell Donson, per source, signs with the Seahawks. So
yes,
he's gone.
I did see that.
Kind
And
of saw that coming.
Puna Ford as well. So Puna Ford just signed.
There we go.
Where did
Jason
he go?
helping us out
Chargers.
Here.
So I did see those two come across as I was looking here as you were talking. But yeah, that's two moves again that speak to moving on, right? I mean, I would have loved to have Puna Ford back. I would have loved to have Tim Settle back in a role where they are just depth,
Tim Settle
right?
got signed elsewhere as well.
Minimum,
right?
yeah. So Tim Settle went to the Texans, I believe, right? So, and yeah, now that Puna Ford is gone, it shows you that although the Bills were re-signing their own, they are moving on in a sense. They are defensive tackles and the defensive line in general. That depth is going to still need to be added. And Bean knows what he's doing there, right? Keep in mind that we added a guy last year who was our leading sack guy after the draft, right? So it wasn't like
Leonard Floyd.
Yeah, Leonard Floyd was added after the draft, right? And on a lot of these contributing players were added after the draft, veteran depth who isn't a premier free agent right now. If they don't get signed in this first week, basically, you're probably not getting signed until after the draft, right? Not only have teams done their draft and know where their holes are, but it doesn't count against the compensation and all that. And there's so many reasons, but then
and the
sign them for the minimum. Yeah,
the market's cold, right? So they kind of accept that, hey, I'm not going to get the contract I wanted. I'll take less.
And in that case, why not come to Buffalo, be the best version of yourself, maybe win a Super Bowl? You know, there's a lot of good draws there that Bean knows how to work that magic and say, okay, he's probably calling those guys right now, right? Yeah. It's not like last year he never called Floyd until after the draft. No, he was talking to him and saying, hey, I'm interested. We would love to have you on this team, but here's how we're thinking.
Von Miller's trying out his GM, building that GM resume, right?
That's right. Yeah,
Floyd,
brought him in. And exactly. So those calls are happening now, right? Bean is very active right now. Everybody's like, oh, where's the signings? Where's the information? We know what Bean is doing, right? That Taron Johnson extension is happening likely right now, right? It just isn't being announced, right? Those calls to free agent safeties. That's one position where I do think if they don't sign anybody, we know they're going to, right? It's not a matter. Nobody, we're going to sign, if not two more safeties from this veteran market, right? And I think that that's a position specifically where it is likely going to be after the draft. But Bean is making those calls now saying, hey, here's what we got. Here's what I'm thinking. We really would love to have you. If you get a better offer, I'm happy for you. Take it, but know that we want you, and here's what we're thinking for it. And that's going to be important for adding contributing pieces to this team. Again, just because a guy doesn't sign in the first week of free agency doesn't mean he's not going to be a major contributor for this team, wherever his position is, right? And same with something like kick returner, punt returner. There could be a wide receiver out there or whoever that has that special ability after the draft that we're like, you know what, this is still a hole we have. We're going to bring him in and let him compete and maybe win that job, So
I think when we were first looking at the safety market, it's pretty thin in free agency, right?
A lot of guys got cut though. Yeah.
A lot of guys got cut. So I think that really helps, Brandon Bean's strategy and shopping at the thrift store right after the draft that, they thought maybe they would have a shot, maybe get a couple different offers to choose from. But, with all these good players, good safeties hitting the market, I think it's, it's much more in the Bills' favor to get a good player at a cheap price.
Yeah.
All right. What else we got here? Eric Armstead saga. Yes. There was a report earlier that Eric Armstead signed with the Bills. I think I have that here. Yep.
Diana Rossini. Yeah.
Diana Rossini from ESPN. Former 49er Eric Armstead is signing with the Bills per sources. And then another report comes out 2 seconds later and says that Eric Armstead is signing with the Jacksonville Jaguars.
And then that tweet was deleted, by the way. That information was deleted.
And mistake acknowledged. It's not the reporter. But
again, she got a lot of hate for that. But come on, this stuff happens. It's free agency. They're talking to both teams at the same time. Right. So somebody from his camp obviously said, hey, this deal's happening. And, it's going to the Bills or whatever. But at the last second, Jacksonville said, "Here's our offer," and he took it. Right?
Yeah.
It changed. So I'm not going to give her any hate for making that call and then changing it, within reasonable time of seeing that it was wrong.
Mhm.
But
But you were
this
excited though, right?
no, I mean,
When you saw this.
no, I was literally, so this started the night before, right? Everybody was like,
Everyone's
"Oh,
on watch,
Armstead
right?
got cut and he's really interested in the Bills." And this was reported right away by the 49ers beat reporter, right, who said, "Look at the Bills because his wife's from Buffalo and all this." And I don't believe that was like a load of crap to me, because I'm like, there's no way
Yeah.
he's signing to the Bills for like 6
Right.
to 8 million when he's going
His
to get
wife was at Duff.
15, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Like this, Eric Armstead, I would have loved to have him. Don't get me wrong, but I did not buy into it at all, because I was like, look, if this happens, it'll be a miracle, and I don't expect or think that's going to happen even in the slightest. So it didn't surprise me at all. I mean, look at the numbers: 3 years, 51 million. Like the Bills
Right.
couldn't pay half of that to have him for
Yeah.
3 years. So
Yeah, they're broke.
I mean, it was not going to happen, and I did not expect it to happen. But it certainly was a saga, because you saw some of the people on Twitter, a lot of the guys at Cover One, I know, were really excited about this. A lot of the guys
Would have been a
out
huge
there
upgrade, I
were
think.
tweeting saying like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this could happen, and here's how it can happen. And if we do the money this way, and if he only takes 8 million to do this," I knew there was no way he's taking 8 million to come to Buffalo. Like I would have loved it, but I never bought into it.
Right.
So
Yeah, he's
great
a player
player,
that has a market, but I mean,
certainly.
to get a defensive tackle like this, I think would give us a lot more confidence, right? Going into
Oh
the
God.
draft. That's one position I thought they need to fill. I mean, Daquan Jones, great player. He was re-signed. That was huge. But to
Mhm.
add a guy like Eric Armstead really kind of fills the need, right? Now you can go, shop the free agent market and find a really cheap defensive tackle like they've done in the past with Tim
Sure.
Settle, Jordan Phillips. But you kind of put that story to rest, right? Going into the draft, we don't need a defensive tackle early, and you can really focus on the fun position, receiver, right? Or whatever position, safety or whatever you prefer.
Sure.
But
I
now
mean,
I still think it's a need though, because this didn't
it is.
happen, right?
It is, but there's still, again, I think that's a position, specifically defensive tackle, where there's enough guys out there that they're going to be the later signings, right? We're going to add
Mhm.
2 veterans. I don't care who we draft or what happens. 2 veterans will be signed post draft to this team to say, look, you're coming in. And those players know that on this team, the way we run this defense, Sean McDermott's defense, you're going to get snaps. You're likely going to get 30% of the snaps coming in as a $1.5 million signing, or whatever the minimum is now, $1.8
Right. Well, it's
million
the Leonard
signing,
Floyd
right?
story, right?
Yeah,
Come here,
exactly.
play for 1 year. We're gonna put you in a position to succeed, and then you can go get paid,
And he did,
which he did.
right? And that's, a lot of those guys are even just the depth pieces, right? Even if you're just a Tim Settle or a Poona Ford, you're going to come in after the draft and say, okay, this is a good place for me to get snaps, to show what I can do, and then hopefully get a bigger contract next year or stay with this team long term, whatever it ends up being. But yeah, I mean, Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, they have the leverage in that situation. They know, hey, we want you, come here. We'll talk to you when we're ready, but it's not going to be until post draft, because I don't think, again, looking at the list of guys who's available, I would take 2 of those, at the bottom of the barrel right now, like 10 guys in. So even if a lot of them do sign, there's still some names that can contribute, right? And I think that, one that I've seen glorified a little bit is Carl Lawson, right? I don't think he's
Mhm.
signed anywhere yet, at least that I've seen.
Yeah, the
So
Bills were in on him before he
edge,
signed
right?
with the
We're talking
Jets.
defensive
Right,
line in
right,
general, but
right.
yeah, exactly. The Bills were in on him before, and he kind of had a down year, so he really fits the mold of has an upside, right? He's in
Yeah.
the valley, and we want to bring him back up that hill. Even if we can get a little more out of him, I think that would be a good signing. But that's just to bring up one name that I've heard floated around. There's plenty of guys, though, that it could be somebody you haven't heard of by the time it comes around, but they will be contributors when it's all said and done, both at tackle and at edge. The D line in general needs those bodies to be able to rotate,
Yeah.
needs the competition in camp to decide who's making the roster, right? And Eli Anku is not going to immediately just be given a roster spot, right? There's going to be competition there for him.
For sure, and a lot of that's just how's Von Miller gonna be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, is there any indication that he's gonna come back to even 3/4 of the player he was, right,
Mm-hmm.
versus what we saw last year, which was very disappointing? But Daquan Jones re-signs with the Bills, 2 years, $16 million. Huge for us, right? 32 years old now, but I mean, it's a different defensive line when he's playing, right? Especially in
Yes.
stopping the run, right?
Oof,
Plays a large
big
role
time.
in that. He played the last 2 games. The regular season had 2.5 sacks. I mean, you like to see that from this position because for a while there it was just Ed Oliver making plays on the inside, right? So I think it looked a lot different with Daquan Jones in there.
Yes.
Is he
Yes.
enough, though, is the question, right? Now 32 years old.
I mean, yeah.
Is it enough? You need another player that can.
Yes, right. You need another caliber one tech D tackle, right? You need a guy at that level to be able to get snaps and come in and take that position and give him some rest. Like we said, they rotate, right? So whatever percentage of snaps you want Jones and Oliver in there, there's going to be another combo of guys that needs to be at that same level. I mean, obviously not contract or full production wise, but you need to be able to maintain that with a D tackle. And again, I trust that Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane are doing the work to find that guy, right? Beane knows the budget, knows what he wants to spend on it, knows, maybe they will bring in a slightly higher paid guy to be right behind Daquan Jones because you want that injury protection, but also the rotation that you need. So
right,
same
you
type
can't
of
put
thing,
yourself in a position like last year where Daquan Jones goes out
correct.
week 5. He doesn't come
Yes.
back to week 16, right? So it's, if you're in
Right.
that position, you got to have some depth there to,
Yes. Somebody you can
fill that
trust to
gap.
start again. And that's why we saw, them sign at linebacker depth, who's somebody who's had the green dot, somebody who's been there, can play both positions, right? Because that position really cost us in the playoffs, especially, but in the season as well, that was an adapted position. I think we got a lot out of the guys we had. But regardless, it still is something you want to protect yourself against moving forward. And knowing how much they rotate on the line, you have to prioritize getting bodies that you trust there. So they'll know the budget, but it wouldn't surprise me if they sign maybe one more guy there before the draft and then wait till after to get 2 more veterans after drafting one at each position, an edge and a D tackle, right? So we'll see how it all shakes out, but that's my expectation right now. Draft 1 at each position at least. Later round picks, you're not expecting to maybe contribute as much or make the roster, but I'm talking top 3 rounds is probably going to be wide receiver, D tackle, edge in my mind at this point. And that's, my expectation is bring in a guy, draft 1 guy each at those positions, and then sign, 2 veterans to come in and be those.
Yeah, and I think Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, they're really good at finding players late in the draft who have high upside, right? Meaning, hey, they may have been overlooked in the draft, but like this player is a team captain, good leadership, going to put the work in to, contribute to the team. So I think they've been good at that in the past. I mean, there's a lot of starters on the defense, especially for the Bills, that were drafted late, right? And they, we cut Trey White probably because Christian Benford was so good, right? And
right.
You kind of you're put at ease there, Matt Milano, right? But I think this is an important draft in that way where you have to find these contributors, guys you can coach up who can contribute to the team, right? And I think that'll be the focus for the defensive line, especially. Ty Johnson and AJ Epinesa resigned as well. I'll start with Ty Johnson here. For me, I just thought Ty Johnson would provided a spark when the team needed it, right? They go through these cold streaks on offense, whether that's Josh Allen, whether it's the play calling, whatever it is. Usually the run game is what gets them out of these cold these cold streaks on offense. I thought Ty Johnson really contributed to that role when it was needed, right? Overall, I thought he had a pretty decent year. What do you think about Ty Johnson?
Yeah, excellent complementary player in this offense, right? He was able to burst through the line, get burst yardage. He's very physical, which is great. He's not a huge body guy, which I still think is the need at running back for the Bills, right? We need that bowling ball back. But for my money, I wanted Ty Johnson back, right? And the important thing is you're not overpaying him, right? We saw one of my biggest surprises of free agency so far was that running back was like top thing to go, right? Everybody got their running back in check. And it wasn't overpaying for running backs necessarily. Well, by any standard, they're not the highest paid, right? We're talking below the lowest wide, below Curtis Samuel's contract, basically, right? But when you're paying a wide receiver that much, it takes away from other positions. So I'm not a fan of paying running back, right? So I just think if you have a guy who is your one, you bring in Joe and Bob to be the 2 and 3 and get it done, because there's not much difference between those guys and number 2s and 3s who are getting a lot more money, right?
Right, and
So,
it'll be
and a guy
interesting to
like
see
Ty
'cause
Johnson,
right.
he's already proven his value to this team. You got to keep him around, and he's a good complementary back for James Cook, who you already have there. And if you pair that with, again, the bigger body guy that we still need, that's going to be your 1, 2, 3 punch at running back right there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up about not paying running backs, because there's a lot of running back movement right now, right?
Yes, yeah.
Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon,
Joe
Josh
Mixon,
Jacobs.
I mean,
yeah, no, shocking.
Josh
But like,
Jacobs, these guys are all coming, most of them off down years, and they're getting
right.
paid, right?
But
8, 9, 10, 11, $12 million. Those are big contracts.
right. And it'll be
Saquon,
interesting to see, like,
you
is
bring
it
him
worth
in.
it though? Is it
Exactly.
do they
I
contribute
don't
to the
think so.
team? Do they help them win games? That's the big question, especially Barkley and Derrick Henry, because they're going to good teams who are already good. You know, how much do they move the needle for them?
Right. And in those situations, you take a little bit of the burden off, right? So, which is good, right? Derrick Henry doesn't have to be the every down ball carrier that he was for years and years with the Titans, right? He can be the playmaker and maybe come in positions where it's going to benefit him most, right? And benefit his team most, which is why you pay a guy like that. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me that Derrick Henry was paid that much, because he's, proven his value in this league. But
he showed he still has it too, right?
Right. The fact that he's down. I mean, there were people talking about him coming to the Bills, and I laughed that off every single time, because I'm like, you wish he would come to the Bills, but guy's going to get paid. And he did, right? Rightfully so. So
I really I wanted him to come to the Bills just so I could have Josh Allen and Derrick Henry and Madden. That would have been
there
epic,
you go. Oh
right?
my God. Yeah.
That would have been great.
Well, if you go to the talking
have to
heads
trade,
on
I
like
guess.
ESPN or NFL Network or whatever, that's what they're saying. Who's the best quarterback running back tandem in the NFL right now? You know what nobody said? Josh Allen and James Cook. Are you kidding me? James Cook is coming off a career year where he was one of the top backs in the NFL, and Josh Allen is one of the top quarterbacks by far, right? Like, there's no question.
I think he's in the top 20 running backs too, right? Like, so.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, come on. If you're talking quarterback running back duo, how could you not have those two in the mix and instead say Henry and Jackson, who we've never seen play a snap together, or one of these other guys, Barkley and Hurts. Now, those guys are definitely higher level, but you can't tell me that Barkley and Hurts are going to be better than what we've already seen from Josh Allen and James Cook, who are doing it again next year. So, it just tells you that the talking heads are completely clueless on the NFL. They know big cities and big names, and that's it. But they don't pay attention to Buffalo, and they disrespect Buffalo all the time. If you're having that conversation, there's no way you can't insert Allen and Cook in that conversation, right? In terms of what they have already proven on the field, where they're projected to be next year, you're assuming that the combination of Henry and Jackson is going to be all of a sudden as dynamic as both of them in their prime. We don't know that, right? So it's just that was pretty frustrating for me as I was flipping through the channels, getting my breaking news throughout the day, because it was just, come on now, get out of here with that.
So frustrating for you. You had to become a talking head to get your point across.
Yes, but I'm not on the national TV. This Stephen A. Smith and all them guys saying the Bills are done, their window's closed. This is nonsense talk, and us Bills Mafia and those listening to this podcast right now know better, right? We're Bills fans. We understand where this team is. We know what they're doing. We know what we're planning for. We trust in Bean and McDermott. The guys on TV saying the window is closed are just idiots. They are literally ignorant on the Buffalo Bills and how this team works, right? They are, or just trying to get clicks in the case of summing them, right? We've seen Nick Wright do that over the years. He's just saying that to get clicks. He doesn't believe that in his heart. It works. They get their clicks. but we know that, when you're on ESPN or whatever, those guys, they're just purely ignorant. They do not understand how this team or how the NFL works. And that to me is frustrating, because they get the attention, they get the national spotlight. People hear them a lot more than they hear us, right? So it's absolutely frustrating. And that's why people should listen to podcasts like ours instead of going to the, bigger networks and hearing the nonsense that they spew. Because if they're this wrong about the Bills, it makes you wonder how wrong they are about the other teams as well that they talk about, right? So yeah, I mean, and the praise they give where it isn't deserved sometimes. So it's obvious, but yeah, I'll get off my soapbox now. But that is it's just so frustrating that the hate continues. The hate continues.
It'll be there forever, right?
Yeah.
All right, AJ Epinesa. What are we thinking about him? 40% of the snaps last year. Give or take a little, but most games was in the 40s when it came to playing time. 6.5 sacks, right? I think this is probably the best year we've seen from AJ Epinesa. Right. 10 QB hits. I think there's now expectation for him to take another step, right?
Yes.
Will he get more snaps is another question.
Possibly, right? Again, with the rotation, more snaps is a relative term. What, he's going to go up to 60%? That would be miraculous in this offense, right?
Yeah.
So
he did miss 2 games, so you got to think he'd be pushing double-digit sacks, playing only 40%, right?
Absolutely, and he was making big plays. That's not counting the interception, the batted balls. He was making big plays consistently, and I think that's super important, right? When you're doing things like that, that's phenomenal, right? You're having true impact on the field. And what I like about this signing most is exactly what you said. There is an expectation that he's going to continue to grow, right? He's staying put. So he's grown with this team, this coaching staff, the guys around him, and now he's going to be that guy in this offense or this defense a little more, but he's got growth underneath him, right? He's still got room to go up. And that's what we talked about with some of these other guys who were in the valley and have room to go up. Epenesa is still on that growth chart up to see what can he really be. And I think that's why it ended up working out for both sides, because Epenesa's thought is I can continue to grow and either prove that this team needs to pay me the big money to keep me around or get that big contract with somebody else, and stay put where I don't have to learn something all over again to continue the growth chart that I'm already on. And so I think that worked very well for both sides. This was another very popular, hey, if we can make this work and nobody's throwing 10 million at him, which they didn't, very reasonable signing. And the contract is what ultimately made this work. Another one where there's some incentives where it could be a little more, but likely it's basically like a $6 million a year contract, right? So that's very reasonable. That's very much where I wanted him to be. And I think it's going to end up working out best for both the player and the team.
Do you think he took less to stay in Buffalo?
No, it's not about that. No, nobody does that. That's not a real thing, right? Like maybe if you're like, oh, I want to win a ring, and you're like, I'm going to get that minimum.
Matt Milano did that.
I've already made my money. You're right. Matt Milano was the exception to that. Where he definitely took less. He could have gotten a lot more. It's not that he took less. He could have gotten a lot more if he played hardball, right? Instead, he took the extension and said, this is what I want. So probably, and he was then, right? I've been the biggest Matt Milano stan forever, since the day he was drafted and came to our team and I saw his play on the field, right? We remember back in the day when we would have debates about should he be traded or whatever, and I would get up there and say he's our best player on the field, and he's proven that through, right? And that's why he's still on this team. And all these guys around him are now going to get paid a lot more than Matt Milano, which is funny. He did. But that's not really a thing you can rely on, and guys don't do that. Again, I think Epenesa knew where his value was. Somebody might have offered him 2 years, $10 million a year, but within reason, you're like, okay, or I can do 2 years, $6 million basically with the Bills, and then work my way up to 20 million and be that guy again, right? Because that's what,
if you're on a good track and things are working out for you, why disrupt it, right?
Exactly. Those top edge rushers are getting absolutely paid, and Epenesa is still young enough where he knows he's got another contract in front of him. He's just got to prove it, and he bought into that, which makes sense.
Right, and I think
it was the perfect match for team and player.
But going into the season, I think we were high on Greg Rousseau making the jump. Right.
Yeah.
Turns out it was actually Leonard Floyd and AJ Epinesa. So again, I think the spotlight goes back on Greg Rousseau.
Yes.
Because he's the first round pick. He's the
Certainly.
Genetic freak, the long arms, right? Unique abilities. So again, I think the spotlight's back on him. Epinesa is more like, we weren't expecting
complimentary,
a jump,
right? Yeah.
But it just happened. Yeah. So we're like, okay, we'll take it. But I think going into the season this year, we're still probably looking at Rousseau, right,
Yes.
kind of see how he's doing.
You
But
definitely,
I think
he definitely has
Epenesa's
room to
playing with house
improve.
money at this point.
Right. Rousseau in the run game definitely proved to be, I mean, he's like one of the top graded edge guys for the
Yeah,
run
it could
game,
be
but
role,
he's
right?
he's definitely got to step it up with the sacks and production wise, right? Like getting to the quarterback, making those tackles that matter for loss, is going to, Rousseau needs to step up as well, but he's under contract. So, and he, will probably get that 5th-year option as well, to say, okay, what do we do with him? Right. So it's going to be, he's going to be on the team for a while too. And he needs to show improvement for that big payday as well. And you're not going to have enough money to sign both of these guys basically in the long run. Right. So that's why you're lucky to get Epenesa for 2 more years. Hopefully you keep Rousseau around and you have some consistency and some depth there, right? In guys who know how to work together.
Yeah,
Always good.
It's always great just to follow and see how it works out. It'd be really interesting to see like what the Bills do in the draft. Is there gonna be competition for Epenesa? Right? That's always a question mark. But let's look around the league a little bit. Last topic of the night, tons of movement, right? Talked about the running backs and how they kind of just every running back was on the move this year. And I think receiver, a lot of surprises there as well. Kelvin Ridley getting a huge contract with Tennessee.
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins was extremely surprising. I thought he'd be in Minnesota forever, but
no,
turns out he
I predicted
his
that
wife from Atlanta or something like that. But
I didn't know that. I didn't know that
yeah.
When we talked about it on this show, it was when he got injured and we were saying, will he be back with Minnesota? He's a free agent. I mentioned Atlanta as a top landing spot for him, not knowing his wife was from there, but just knowing where that team is and the fact that they had money that they were willing to invest. You might as well go out and get the top quarterback, right? And they did do that. And the word out is that they're going to be trading Ritter or trying to trade him. So, they have their guy for the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And that contract actually makes Kirk Cousins if he plays it out to the max, he will be one of the, if not the, I think, top paid player ever in the NFL in terms of money given out by contract. And already with the guarantees, he'll be in the top 3. So that's insane to
played
think
his cards right.
Right, he did. He bet on himself. Think about the journey he took to Washington, then Minnesota. Right? He's been the franchise quarterback. He still has a lot to prove. I think, he still has a lot in the tank. I'm high on Kirk Cousins. So I think him going to that team makes a lot of sense. They have a lot of weapons. He's going to be the veteran guy who can help them grow and take that next step. And then, yeah, I just think that is a great match for both the team and the player again, where Kirk Cousins is going to thrive in that offense, assuming he comes back from his injury. Okay. Right. That's the other thing here is, if the Atlanta Falcons are taking a big, a trust step there to say he's going to bounce back and be, the best version of himself.
Good old Ralph Wilson Sr. Letting us know that Ritter already went to the Cardinals.
Yes. That was where he was traded. Yes. Yeah. But I forget. I think that was, that's right. For Moore, right? Randall Moore. Went back, Rondell Moore. Yeah,
kind of a running
swapped
back type receiver.
Player for player, no draft.
The other quarterback was Sam Howell going to Seattle.
Yes, that was a
2
big
weeks
one,
ago. We talked about,
are they going to be on the same
number
team?
2? Are they going to have 2 UNC quarterbacks in the same roster? And Drake May, Sam Howell, because I thought Sam Howell did some good things last year, right? Before they decided to tank the season, that whole thing. But does that indicate now that the Commanders will go get Drake May in the draft?
Oh, well, they're definitely getting quarterback. Whether it's going to be, whoever, May or Daniels, we'll see. But I do think that's the direction they've now blatantly put out there, right? We are taking a quarterback. And, to somewhat, this wasn't surprising. When you get a new GM, a new owner, a new coach, even though Sam Howell has shown a lot and probably has a bigger upside in the league still, room to grow, with all of that coming in and you have the second pick and pretty much you're taking quarterback, there was no place for him on this team. So moving on was just what made the most sense. Now the fit for Seattle makes things interesting because, even though they're paying Geno Smith, Sam Howell is a caliber of quarterback where he has big upside. And I love the weapons on that offense. I mean, no matter which way you look at it, Seattle's offensive weapons are some of the absolute best in the league, top to bottom. From running back 1, running back 2, wide receiver 1, 2, and 3. I mean, any quarterback would be absolutely happy to throw the ball to those guys. However, that comes at the expense of the offensive line, which was not very good last year, and which led to, Smith getting injured and having trouble getting the ball out and all sorts of things that, when that doesn't happen, nothing's going to go right. So they do have things to work on there. But I think if he gets the chance, again, there's still some upside there. I think Sam Howell can be a decent starter in this league. And he showed that with a few 400-plus yard games and all that. And certainly situations dictate that. If you're down by a bunch, you're going to be heaving the ball a bunch. But, it's unfortunate for him that he ended up in a situation where the whole franchise is being overturned. So, you're out with it. And I don't think it's as much of a reflection on the player as it is where the team is at right now.
Right. In Seattle, right. Pete Carroll out, right. Mike McDonald from Baltimore in. And it'll be interesting to see if they maintain that culture, because Pete Carroll's been there for so long that, the culture's been the same for what? How long was he there? 10 plus years?
Yeah, a long time, right?
So it'll be interesting how they make changes. What's the new philosophy? They're an interesting team to watch, especially because like the local team, the Washington Huskies, have so many people in the draft this year, and they kind of, being a local team, have some kind of insights with that, right? They probably have relationships with the coaches. You get a little more information that way, but interesting to see what direction they go, right? Which kind of ties us into David's question here. In what round do you think Bean will select a center? I love Jackson Powers Johnson and Zach Frazier. Do you believe in the possibilities that Bean considers the importance of replacing Mitch Morris with a solid prospect? Everyone has a receiver, but the importance of O-line isn't really a priority. Yeah, this is interesting because we kind of discussed this last week. Like, will the Bills, they're saying they're going to put Connor McGovern at center, but is that just to make everyone happy for now? And then they're going to target center in the draft and then move Connor McGovern back to left guard, because Connor McGovern is really well known as, one of the best pass blocking left guards in the league. Right. So moving him to center, and I know he's played center in the past. You mentioned Joe Marino brought that up. He does have some snaps at center, but he's so good at left guard and pass protection that would you want to mess with a good thing?
And already has on this team, right?
Yeah,
Again, it works with Josh Allen under center. So
maybe it's they just like David Edwards. So you make that move right at left guard. But I think Jackson Powers Johnson is going to be gone in the top 15, top 20, just because he does have the versatility, guard center. And he's good
certainly
at it, big guy.
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't think it's going to be
center.
I don't think it's going to be one of those top guys, right? But round 3, round 4, they're definitely going to draft a center as well, right? Especially if it's a center guard versatile guy, right? Regardless of anything, even if they don't draft a guy, 100%, this is not Connor McGovern's job, right? They don't hand you the center position and say, take it, right? They're going to bring in legitimate competition for him. Whether that means, again, signing a depth guy who didn't get signed in free agency, bring him in and saying, hey, your competition. That doesn't work so well on the offensive line in some cases, because the guys who are out there at that point are probably out there for a reason. But they will, and ultimately I think this will be by draft a center versatile guy to compete for the position of center and legitimately be there, right? So we saw this with Osiris Torrance, right? Last year, and we mentioned this last week as well. He was not handed the position. He had to earn it, right? And he did through the preseason. So I think if they invest maybe a 3rd round pick on a center and they say, we're going to let you take snaps, we're going to let you be legitimate, and it clicks, right? You figure out your top 5 and it ends up being that guy at center, then it's a question of who plays guard, right? Is it going to be McGovern or Edwards? And I think ultimately it would be McGovern, because we've seen that does work. And I feel a little more comfortable with going with what we know works rather than, moving everybody around. But you just don't know. But we absolutely can put 100% stamp on the fact that they will bring in legitimate competition for the center position, legitimate depth, legitimate competition, because we traded away Bates, who was that guy, and we moved everything around. So absolutely have to get that done. And in my dream scenario, that's exactly what happens. You draft a third round or fourth round. He ends up being a stud. You really like the way he clicks with this offense. He does everything you need him to do. Boom, he's the starting center day one. And, McGovern is still left guard, and Edwards is that depth sixth guy, right? And plays that role well. Those are where we know they are.
Problem is getting a center in the later round picks that can start, especially coming off Mitch Morris. That's a tough one for sure. That's a huge hill to climb there. But I do think the offensive line was so good last year, right? It's their best year since McDermott's, been the coach. So I think that's a good thing, right? Try to maintain that as the best you can. And maybe David Edwards does fill that, right? And they think they're going to be better off with this structure. But I think it's a priority, right? I definitely agree with David that it is a priority.
It needs to be, yeah.
But again, they have depth there already. So it's like kind of balancing those two things.
Good point that the Bills do not have a third round pick. They traded one away for the cornerback depth that we got last year. And then this year we were expecting to get that third round comp pick for Tremaine Edmonds, and it ended up being a fourth. Still some contention there. I don't understand that system or why everybody said it was a third if it ends up being a fourth.
Like, you get a pick. You get a pick.
But ultimately, I don't think that stops us from taking a third round guy. They're going to do everything they can. I think that Bean will work the phones and use some of those later round picks to get back up into the third round and pick a guy, or use it to make 2 second round picks, which might end up working as well. But that's going to cost more leverage than we have. You might be dipping into next year's picks if you end up doing that. But I do think I say top 3 because I fully expect that we're going to take a guy in that round, and it's not going to be later 4th round by our next pick. Right. So we will still have 3 top 100 guys is what my hope is ultimately.
Agreed. Yeah. What else you got? I think that's it for the night.
Yeah.
Signing overall, Curtis Samuel, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the first step in the right. Like, everybody was waiting for that first big shoe to drop, right? Oh, we've only re-signed our guys, or, oh, we signed, this guy who's not going to be a real player. Now, every player we've signed so far matters and is going to contribute in their way for this team. And more importantly, every guy has been on budget, and Bean has worked his absolute magic as he always does, especially now with this Curtis Samuel signing, because that's the biggest name to come in. It satisfies the fan base. Hey, that we finally got a guy.
I think it puts everyone at ease going into the draft, right? Which is what I needed. I was just bitching up a storm 2 days ago that needs some move to happen, right?
Exactly.
And I understand the strategy, be patient, right? We're shopping at the Dollar General, but all these signings going, through my Twitter, through my notifications, I just wanted to see one Bills signing, right? So I'll take this one. This one's pretty good overall. Especially going back and watching Curtis Samuel and realizing, he does still have some juice, right? He's still the player that we all know him as. He's not washed up yet, right? So
yes, absolutely, right. And again, this is going to be a player who's contributing, and Bean is not done. Bean is going to continue to make signings like this, maybe not for as much as this, but continue to work the phones and make things happen. And by this time next week, we'll have more to talk about. I can tell you that in terms of breaking news or new things that have happened. And we're also going to start prepping for the draft, which is going to be exciting, right? Our draft series coming up here. Looking forward to diving a little deeper. I've done a lot of surface level stuff, but need to dive deeper. And can't wait to bring that to our audience as well, because you and I love the draft, right? I love covering that stuff, and I can't wait to post it again and bring that to Built in Buffalo as well. And looks like people are still some new people seeing us for the first time, as Roy Collins helping me out here. Romeo has had epic rants in the past. Great stuff.
Believe it or not, Anthony's actually calmed down a lot. He really has. I don't know what it is. I think he had 2 kids.
This is who I am, though. Yeah,
calmed him down a little. So.
But regardless, man, I have one energy level, and that's go, go, go. This is just who I am. It's not something I turn on for the show or whatever. If you're talking to me, out at dinner or, at a bar or wherever, this is who I am. So if you see me and we have a conversation, know that this is absolutely the genuine Anthony Romeo that you're getting, right?
And Anthony did wear a Bills suit. He used to wear a full Bills suit every show, but then he got a real job.
We'll bust that out. We'll bust that out again. No, well,
Yeah.
we know why I wasn't allowed to wear that for certain reasons for a while. I still wear it all the time. Game days, for the games I go to, the suit's still in full action, and I'm always dressed to the nines. But yeah, it's got to make a comeback. So you may be seeing the Bills suit back here on Built in Buffalo come a season time, or maybe even in the preseason. So don't worry, it's still there, and it's still going to be in all its
How about
glory.
draft night?
Ooh, that's a good point. I could wear it draft night. You're
There you
right.
go.
If I do coverage, which I'm hoping to do some coverage with Built in Buffalo, I absolutely will wear the suit. There you go. Look forward to it, Roy, because it's coming back.
Mark the calendar.
There you go. There
All
you
right,
go.
that's all we got. Tune in next week, 7:30. We'll be back here. We'll recap the other signings the Bills make or any other roster moves that they make. Be sure to stick with us on Built in Buffalo, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for kicking it with us.